The second I opened the incident log, I could smell something was off. 3 separate no-spill reports on the same day 2 employees were treated for chemical burns? That doesn't add up. And trust me, numbers don't lie. They just get buried under thousands of rows of spreadsheet nonsense. To top it off, someone logged a clean audit, just 37 minutes after the local fire department had already reported a hazardous materials call at the same site. This job was never supposed to be exciting. It's compliance work, dry-by-the-book stuff. I was just supposed to make sure our company standards lined up with the policies of this new acquisition. But what I uncovered wasn't a simple policy mismatch. It was a full-blown cover-up, sitting right there in the open. I took a slow sip of the office coffee, tasted like hot printer ink with a dash of lemon, and stared at the blinking cursor on the audit form. This wasn't my first time seeing someone try to slap duct tape on a disaster and hope nobody noticed. But this? Faking safety audits and submitting them to a public company's system? That's not just risky. That's either dumb or desperate. Maybe both. By the way, if you're listening and haven't subscribed yet, it actually helps more than you'd think. We're doing our best to keep stories like this alive. So hit that button, drop a like, it keeps us going. Anyway, the site in question was down in Texas. Alvenic Group had scooped it up recently, part of their latest brilliant move to diversify assets into chemical logistics. Which was ironic, considering they treated compliance manuals like optional bedtime reading. I'd been with Alvenic for almost 12 years by that point. Long enough to know the difference between cutting corners and flat-out negligence. What I found in that integration folder, it wasn't a one-off slip. It was baked into the system. I didn't freak out. That's not my style. I gather the facts. I double-check everything. I build timelines, not drama. So I pulled 6 months of site logs, worker injury reports, chemical disposal records. Every file I could get my hands on that hadn't already been deleted or sanitized by some green intern managing inventory. And I kept seeing the same names. A regional ops director named Kellen Grover, a safety lead who'd never signed off on a single in-person inspection, and a compliance officer from the acquired company who resigned quietly, just 2 days after the merger. I followed procedure, sent a preliminary concern to my manager, tagged it under integration risk, Category 2, kept it neutral, just enough to raise a flag without setting off sirens. His response: "We'll keep it in the weekly review." That's Alvenic speak for "not our problem." Ever since Ivy Carmichael took over HR, that's been the company's unofficial motto. Now, to be fair, at that point I didn't realize how deep Ivy was tied into this mess. I just figured she was another entitled executive with a shiny LinkedIn and zero real-world sense. Her face was plastered on every internal presentation. String of pearls, bleached smile, but there was nothing behind it. Her version of team building was making us all wear purple on Fridays and calling it culture sync. Still, I did what I was supposed to. I wrote the full report, 51 pages with receipts, 6 appendices, internal emails from the site manager hinting at flexible rules for quarterly margins, a disposal log with a line literally blacked out with Sharpie and scanned back in. I didn't cut corners. I used the official whistleblower hotline, not because I was scared, but because I believed the system could work. That's the sad part. I actually thought following the rules would bring the truth to light. That integrity still mattered. But the second I hit submit, I knew something had changed. Like I'd dropped a stone into a deep well and heard nothing come back. Nothing. Just silence. 4 days later, I finally got a response. Case 1047C closed. Marked drama. Not actionable. That was it. No questions, no requests for clarification, just a subject line, a closing sentence, and a signature. Ivy Carmichael, VP of People and Culture. No review. No investigation. She shut the whole thing down like it was a bad TV episode that didn't hold her attention. And the word drama was in all caps, like she wanted to make a point. Or maybe that was just how she operated. I sat there staring at the email for 10 full minutes. Didn't blink. Didn't move. My finger hovered over the reply button, but I didn't hit it. Instead, I saved the email, printed a hard copy, and filed it away under a folder I labeled Fallout. That was the quiet moment when I started what would turn out to be the most deliberate, carefully planned act of rebellion I've ever pulled off. No yelling. No grand speech. I didn't blow anything up or go running to the press. I took a simpler route. I made a clean copy of the full report, polished it so it was fit for external review. I kept the same case number Ivy had slapped shut. Then I sent it, just once, to a federal regulatory inbox listed in the back pages of our company's own ethics handbook. And then I waited. See, the issue wasn't just the spill. It was the cover-up. The part one was never supposed to see. It all started during a routine midweek check. Nothing dramatic. Just reviewing file transfers from the old site's database into our compliance system. I've seen messy transitions before. But then something caught my eye. A cluster of auto-approved safety audits, all logged within 60 seconds of each other. Same IP address. Same signature. All timestamped during a system outage that, according to our IT logs, had knocked the entire South facility offline for hours. That's when the unease started. Not fear. Just that cold weight in your gut when you realize something's wrong and no one else seems to care. Or worse, they saw it and looked the other way. I started matching audit entries to facility shift reports. On July 3rd, the records claimed no anomalies. But 2 hazmat suits had been checked out that day. August 11th, the site supposedly passed a random waste inspection without issue. Yet the camera feeds were missing, archived under a corrupt file name that happened to match a retired disposal route. And September? September was a joke. Sensor 6B picked up a leak, but the report said the alarm was faulty. Thing is, that sensor had just been installed a few weeks earlier. Brand new. Factory certified. Alarms like that don't just malfunction, their way through a 2-hour ammonia spike. Unless someone chooses to ignore it. I flagged all of it. Filed 3 formal entries in our project tracker. Each one marked as pending. No one touched them. They sat untouched for more than 2 weeks. Every Friday, I'd sit in status meetings while junior execs bragged about slashing costs like they were clipping coupons. They'd laugh about how the new site basically ran itself. I kept my mouth shut, biting down so hard I could taste blood. Because when a facility runs itself, what that really means is, someone already decided the rules don't apply. Then I found it, tucked away in an old compressed archive labeled Temp Reports Q2. Inside was a PDF, scanned pages, handwritten logs. Actual records. These weren't in the system. One page jumped out, dated May 19th. A disposal manifest for Class D waste, signed by hand. But the timing didn't match any documented courier pickup. That's a big deal. Class D isn't some leftover cleaning agent. It's restricted, fully traceable. Mishandle that and it's not just a fine. It's prison time. Stamped across the top was a note. Copy only, do not upload. That's when it hit me. They were faking records to hide illegal chemical disposals. I didn't sleep that night. I went back through every guideline, every protocol. I checked them 3 times. I even went back and rewatched the ethics disclosure training from my onboarding, just to remind myself that, once upon a time, this company actually pretended to care. It was all spelled out in the handbook. Employees have a duty to report suspected violations through official, protected channels. No retaliation. No exceptions. I wasn't scared for myself, not really. I was more afraid of what it would mean if I stayed quiet. So I did what the policy said to do. I documented everything. Logged every screenshot, every timestamp, every shred of metadata into a secure folder. I traced each bogus audit back to the source, and wouldn't you know it? Every single one came from a temporary admin account created during the acquisition. No assigned owner. Elevated access. Like someone built a ghost profile just to get their hands dirty, then vanished before the monthly credential cleanup. I packaged everything into a formal whistleblower report. No accusations. No drama. Just facts. The summary alone was 6 pages long. I included 8 supporting files, each cross-referenced with internal logs. And I ended it with this. If these records are genuine, our systems were compromised. If they're false, we've knowingly submitted fake safety data to regulators. Either way, this is a compliance emergency. I sat with that report for hours before submitting it. Stared at the submit button like it might bite. Because once I clicked it, there was no turning back. It would be part of the system. It would get a case number. And from there it would either get handled or buried. I hit send at 3:14 a.m. My cat looked at me from across the room like even he was wondering what I'd just done. By noon the next day, I logged into the system. There it was. Case 1047C. Internal whistleblower Q. And guess where it landed? Ivy Carmichael's office. I shut my laptop and tried to breathe. Told myself to wait it out. Told myself someone would do the right thing. But deep down I already knew the truth. This was never going to see the light of day, not unless I forced it. The email came in on a Tuesday afternoon. Timestamped at 2:12 p.m. Subject line. Case 1047C final status. I was halfway through annotating an appendix about waste stream variances when it showed up in my inbox. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. Just this quiet stillness, like standing in the doorway of a storm you knew was coming. Clicked it. Read it once. Then again. Hi Evan. Thanks for your concern. After internal review, Case 1047C has been marked as drama. Not actionable at this time. Appreciate your passion for the process. Smiley face. Ivy Carmichael. VP People and Culture. #Worldvinic. It wasn't the dismissal that got me. Not even the all-caps drama. Like I was pitching some cable drama instead of reporting a federal violation. It was the goddamn smiley face. That phony little emoji was the cherry on top. The final insult from someone too polished, too insulated, too LinkedIn branded to understand the weight of what she was ignoring. I just stared at the screen for a minute before I moved. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Ivy had been installed in HR 6 months earlier. 1 week she was posting sunrise yoga selfies. The next she was hosting virtual town halls about emotional productivity and handing out vision board templates like they were performance tools. Her only real qualification? She was David Carmichael's daughter, Theo, the guy who once told a compliance director in front of the whole boardroom, "Your job is to make things legal, not stop them." And now his daughter was the one deciding which whistleblower reports made it past the gate. It was always going to end like this. Still, I opened my email settings, forwarded Ivy's response to my personal inbox, saved it as a PDF, printed a hard copy and tucked it behind a framed photo of my niece on my bookshelf, because if there's one place no audit ever checks, it's behind family pictures. I opened the case tracker again and scrolled down to the closed ticket. Even after a case is shut, the system still lets you leave internal comments. I hovered over the text box, thought for a second, then typed a single word. Acknowledged. But I didn't send it. I deleted it instead. I didn't respond. I didn't try to escalate. I didn't march into HR waving a folder and giving a speech about accountability. That's what Ivy would have wanted, for me to get loud, to lose control so she could make it about my reaction instead of the actual problem. I wasn't going to give her that. I stayed silent. But I did do one thing. I took that same report, the full version, the one with cross-reference logs, timestamps, and a disposal manifest that might have broken 3 different federal laws, and stripped it of anything protected under Alvenic's confidentiality rules. I replaced names with roles, cleaned up the formatting, swapped in publicly available EPA guidelines for internal references, polished it for external eyes. Then I rewrote the summary, not with anger, with precision, careful, calm, like a scalpel. And right at the top I added one bold line. Originally submitted to Alvenic Group Whistleblower Hotline Case ID 1047 marked, drama, not actionable. I saved it, but I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I went back to my regular routine, joined the compliance sync like nothing had happened, took notes, flagged a few minor issues, replied to an onboarding email about the new junior analyst Ivy had just hired, a lifestyle influencer who once made a makeup video called, "What even is OSHA?" The next few days crawled by. Outwardly, everything looked normal. Ivy posted an Instagram story from the company rooftop, sipping something purple out of a mason jar with the caption, "Scaling joy, not just margins, purple heart sparkles." I watched. And I waited. Because here's the thing Ivy never understood. You can close a ticket in your inbox, but not in mine. There's a point where silence stops being passive and starts being strategic. That's where I lived for the next 2 weeks. I didn't rehearse speeches, didn't vent to anyone, not my sister, not my old professor, not even the one guy at Alvenic who still brought his lunch in a cooler and skipped rooftop parties. Because this wasn't personal. It was about the report. The real one. The one Ivy never even read. On a quiet night, I fired up a secure browser on my personal laptop, offline, no shared network, and navigated to the EPA's Hazardous Materials Incident portal. The interface was sterile, dry by design. It looked boring. But buried beneath the drop-downs and form fields was the one thing people like Ivy never think about. Someone's always watching. I uploaded the report. No extras. No dramatic summary. Just files, screenshots, charts, and external references. In the summary field, I wrote, "This report concerns potential falsification of safety audits related to Class D chemical handling and disposal at the Westover facility, acquired by Alvinic Group Q2 of this year. Documentation was submitted internally on date and marked drama, not actionable by HR. Internal Case ID 1047C. Please see Appendices A through G for evidence. No finger pointing. No threats. Just data wrapped up with the same case number Ivy tried to bury." I clicked Submit at 11:38 p.m. on a Thursday. At the exact same time, Ivy was posting a LinkedIn carousel from what looked like a trendy wine bar. She was quoting Brené Brown, talking about modern HR leadership, and using the phrase emotional scaffolding 3 separate times. One of the photos showed her back on that rooftop, smiling with her arm around the junior safety manager, the same guy whose signature kept popping up on all the forged audit logs in my report. I didn't bother reading the whole post. I closed the tab and went to bed. Next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at my desk, and typed up a perfectly ordinary status update for the integration team. Action items for facility intake this week include cross-verification of manifests and alignment of retention protocols with central documentation policy. Just another line of corporate wallpaper. Dry, forgettable. On purpose. Over the years, I'd learned the safest place to hide the truth is in plain sight. Wrapped in compliance jargon no one actually reads. Time moved on. I watched Ivy roll out a new Wellness Week campaign, essential oils, yoga mats with the company logo, even a lunch seminar from a local influencer nutritionist on detoxing your workflow. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. Rebuilt spreadsheets. Took meeting notes. Logged irregularities like always, but I didn't submit any more tickets. I knew what happened to people who made noise. Ivy didn't eliminate problems. She rebranded them. Turned safety concerns into vibe disruptions. Labeled accountability as negativity. You couldn't fight that head on. You had to wait for the opening. 3 weeks after I submitted the report, a quiet little email showed up. Plain.gov address. No branding, no drama. Just a confirmation that my report had been received and was under standard preliminary review. That was enough. They'd read it. Or at least open the file. It wasn't lost in some digital black hole. The wheels had started turning. Slowly, yes, but they were turning. So I waited. No exposé. No Reddit thread. No viral video. Just silence. Careful, intentional silence. Because I didn't need to shout. The facts were already documented. The report carried their own logo and their own case ID. 1047C. All I had to do now was give the truth room to breathe. Every day that passed, Ivy seemed more smug. She bounced around the office in her kitten heels, tossing out motivational buzzwords like party favors. Planning Alvinic Fest. Getting ready to speak on a conference panel she hadn't earned the right to attend. But I didn't need her to believe me. I just needed the agency to make the call. It was another Tuesday. They say nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday, and I'm starting to agree. The subject line was clinical. Follow-up request, submission ref #1047C. I didn't hesitate. Clicked it. The message was short. Professional. A federal analyst from the EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance thanked me for the original report and asked for clarification on 3 appendices. They also requested any additional materials that might support or expand the original disclosure. At the bottom in small plain text was a note. Please consider this part of our initial review for potential on-site inquiry. Translation. They weren't just interested. They were coming. I didn't feel victorious. It's not that kind of moment. No balloons drop when the system creaks to life. But I felt something shift. I could finally breathe. Not all the way, but enough to keep going. That evening, I sent them a compressed folder packed with supplemental logs, including a fresh mismatch between reported ammonia disposal volumes and actual shipping records. I included internal emails that hinted at smoothing timelines by the junior site lead. And a final document, one last PDF quietly forwarded to me by the former compliance officer from the acquired company. No sender name, no return address, just one line in the body. If they ask, I wasn't here. 3 days later, a shipment arrived at Alvinic HQ. The front desk thought it was a mistake. No one had ordered anything from DC, not officially, and definitely not something that heavy. It was a binder. Thick, official, with the government seal stamped in foil across the front like a silent accusation. On the spine, printed in bold black letters, was one line. Regulatory Review. Case ID 1047C. That's when I knew we'd crossed the line. There was no going back. I wasn't there when Ivy first laid eyes on it, but I was in the cafeteria later that day when she strutted in with her usual entourage. Someone from Brand, the guy from Ops who only wore golf polos, and that new culture lead, who clapped at everything Ivy said like it was gospel. She let out a laugh loud enough for the whole room to hear. Some audit thing, she said with a careless wave of her perfectly manicured hand. We get one of those every quarter. Nothing serious. Just government people pretending to be busy. The guy from Ops chuckled, said something about bureaucrats needing hobbies. The culture lead jumped in with, "Want me to draft a comms plan in case anyone panics?" I kept eating. Didn't say a word. She didn't even see me. Why would she? Ivy didn't remember names unless you commented on her posts or flattered her outfit. To her, I was just another chair with an ID badge. A quiet fixture in a sea of yes men. But I saw everything. The way her laugh was pitched just a little too high. How her eyes flicked toward the hallway every time someone's phone buzzed. The nervous little hair flip, like she was trying to shake something off her shoulders. What she didn't realize, what she hadn't processed yet, was that the regulator hadn't sent a warning. They'd sent evidence. That binder wasn't a request. It was a receipt for every ignored email, every flagged incident she called drama, every forged report she buried under team culture slogans and shredded behind her desk. And the best part? I still hadn't said a single word. The investigation was underway. And I was no longer the whistleblower. I was the baseline. The shift didn't happen overnight. It started small, subtle changes in meeting schedules, odd little calendar invites sent to site supervisors and mid-level managers. By lunch, some of them weren't answering emails anymore. I watched it unfold like a silent movie behind the glass walls of our conference rooms. Clipboards. Quiet nods. The kind of fake chuckles people give when they're trying not to sweat. Nobody got escorted out. But the air changed every time a new name appeared on the regulatory liaison interview board in the main hallway. They never touched me. Not once. Because my name wasn't on any of the forged documents. I hadn't signed off on a single audit during the transition. I wasn't tied to any of it. I was the guy who flagged the problems, logged the anomalies, and then went completely silent. To them, I wasn't a liability. I was a reference point. And reference points don't speak. They just stay where they are, solid, unmoving, undeniable. Ivy, though? She unraveled beautifully. The morning after the 5th interview, she called a sudden cross-functional town hall. She came dressed for battle, in a crisp navy pantsuit, shoulder pads sharp enough to cut glass. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows like a news anchor about to spin a crisis, holding a latte in one hand and smiling like she hadn't just spent the last month burying violations. "This is a standard compliance conversation," she chirped. "Totally routine. We're working closely with our friends at the agency to ensure transparency, integrity, and, above all, community confidence." Then she launched a slide deck. It had a title, Operation Clearstream. Clearstream. Like this was a campaign. Like this wasn't about people being burned by chemicals or lies being filed under workflow optimism. Somebody clapped. Not many. Just enough to prove that fear makes people stupid. Then she dropped the kicker, her big plan. She was going to take the lead by personally meeting with the federal team. She called it a gesture of collaborative accountability. 2 hours later, the regulator shut it down. The response was short and to the point. Request denied. We are only meeting with operational personnel directly involved in compliance or safety administration. Translation: no influencers, no CEO's daughters, and definitely no one whose job title had turned into word salad. Ivy stared at the email a moment too long. Then she blamed her assistant, said the request was just exploratory, and rushed to book an emergency call with the legal team. By that afternoon, the general counsel's door was closed and didn't open again for hours. Rumors started flying. People said he'd requested 6 months of internal audit logs. Specifically, he was looking at case closures, approval chains, and system access records connected to the whistleblower platform. That last part? It sent a chill through the veins of anyone who had ever seen the phrase Case ID 1047C. Because what Ivy never grasped, what people like her never grasp, is that systems remember. Not just the servers. People do too. I watched it all play out from the same dull beige cubicle I'd sat in for 12 years. No headlines. No spotlight. I answered emails. Logged vendor updates. Flagged a tiny discrepancy in a Q4 document like everything was normal. Because that's where the real leverage was. In the quiet. In the empty space where people expected outrage, and found instead a clean ledger, an audit trail, a system log with my name nowhere near a signature, but everywhere in the fingerprints. Then the language started changing. In meetings, people began saying things like material lapse. The CEO canceled a speaking engagement in Munich. 2 site managers quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles to open to work. And Ivy? She stopped storming into rooms like she owned them. She started hanging near the edges of conversations, hovering in doorways, watching Outlook threads she used to be copied on vanish without her name. This wasn't just a PR mess anymore. It was legal. Somewhere behind a closed office door, the general counsel was staring at a system log with her name next to a timestamp, and a single word typed into the notes field. Closed drama. That was it. That was the line. Because once legal starts asking who typed what, they're not protecting you anymore. They're building a case. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not the air, just the energy. The silence was thick, not accidental. People spoke, sure, but only in short, flat bursts. Quiet exchanges. The kind of hush that settles over a room when everyone knows someone's about to get hit. I stood against the back wall. Not really part of the meeting. Not officially invited. But when legal requested any personnel involved in the initial compliance routing be present for clarity, I got the calendar invite. Nobody looked at me when I walked in. Ivy didn't even glance up. She was seated third from the end. Arms folded. Lips drawn tight like a seam. Her outfit screamed damage control. Shoulder-padded blazer stiff enough to double as armor. Hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like a tension headache in progress. But her nails still sparkled. Old habits die hard. Then the general counsel stepped up. He cleared his throat and dropped a binder on the table with a dull thud. I recognized it immediately. It was the cousin of the one that had shown up at reception weeks ago. Only this one had tabs. Dozens of them. Bright post-its sticking out like flags. 3 red markers down the side, labeled in bold Sharpie. "I'll make this brief," he began, which in legal speak means buckle up. Then he clicked the remote. The screen lit up behind him, just one line center-aligned, black text on a white background. Case ID 1047C. You could feel the room shift. People leaned forward, squinted like maybe the font itself held answers. "This," the general counsel said, "is the backbone of the regulator's inquiry. Not just because of what's in the file, but because of what it demonstrates." He clicked the remote again. Next slide. A screenshot of our internal whistleblower platform. The submission metadata timestamped. My name redacted. 3 months ago, a report was filed internally, flagging safety audit falsification. It was marked drama, not actionable. He let that line hang in the air. Then he reached into the binder and pulled out a printed copy of the closure note. Ivy's name, big as life, sitting right at the bottom in her signature font, round, bubbly, just self-important enough to be a brand. He held the page up for the room to see. This language, this exact case ID, was cited in the report submitted to the EPA 3 days later. Same content, same reference number, and crucially the same closure note. He laid the paper on the table, clicked again. Now a split screen. Our internal platform on the left, the EPA's scanned case file on the right. both labeled with Case 1047C, both highlighted. Same note, same dismissal, same timestamp. Someone in the room let out a sharp breath through their teeth. The regulator's entire stance, counsel continued, is built on this point, that the issue wasn't missed. It was seen, documented, and deliberately closed. They're citing our own closure note as evidence of willful negligence. I didn't flinch, didn't move. I just stood there letting the words do what they were meant to do. Ivy shifted in her chair. Slowly, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, or maybe object, but nothing came out. Her fingers twitched, like they were reaching for a defense that wasn't there. Something she'd lost between a group chat and her last LinkedIn post. Her eyes moved across the room. First to the CFO, who suddenly found his notes fascinating. Then to the head of ops, who wouldn't even look up. And finally to her father's seat. Empty. The CEO hadn't shown. Let me be perfectly clear, the counsel said. This is not being framed as a systems error. The allegation is governance failure. The case ID is not similar. It's exact. The closure note is now logged as formal evidence. He turned to Ivy. We'll need a formal written statement from you by Friday. Until then, please refrain from communicating further with any regulatory liaison. That wasn't a suggestion. Nobody spoke for a full 30 seconds. Not a word. Then the meeting ended. No dramatic exits. No shouting. Just chairs sliding back, papers being gathered, and people pretending they hadn't just witnessed a career being quietly dismantled. I stayed until the room emptied. Ivy didn't move. She just sat there, eyes locked on the printout, as if staring long enough might make it rewrite itself. I didn't say anything to her. Didn't smirk. Didn't gloat. I walked past the table, past the binder still open to the page with her name, and I thought, you never should have clicked close. Because the system didn't forget. It printed. They called it a transition period, which is corporate speak for. The fall guy's down and we're still counting the damage. First came the memo. It hit inboxes company-wide at 6:37 a.m., stamped with that soft corporate font companies love to use right before they set something on fire. Effective immediately, Ivy Carmichael has been placed on administrative leave pending further review of procedural discrepancies identified in recent regulatory findings. We remain committed to transparency and operational integrity. No signature. Just one word at the bottom of the memo. Leadership. By noon, the second shoe dropped. David Carmichael, CEO, founder, father of Ivy, was stepping down to focus on his family and pursue personal wellness goals. Right. This is the same guy who once said sleep was a bad habit invented by weak shareholders. But sure. Wellness. Word around the office was that he left the boardroom with a migraine and a half-zipped suitcase. By the end of the day, the board issued its own carefully sanitized statement. There had been a breakdown in protocol. A failure of internal escalation. No one used the word lie, but they didn't have to. The deliberate omission spoke loud enough. I didn't pop champagne. Didn't send sarcastic gifs or circulate a told you so playlist. I just packed up my desk. Didn't take much, one box. A couple of training manuals. A thumb drive I hadn't touched since the early days of the acquisition. A half-dead plant. And on top, laid flat against the cardboard, the printed email Ivy had sent me all those months ago. Case 1047C. Marked, drama. Not actionable. I'd had it framed. Nothing fancy. Black border. No nameplate. Just the paper itself, smiley face and all. Not a trophy. A reminder of what they tried to bury, and how little it took for one person to dig it back up. Around 3 o'clock, HR stopped by. Nervous. Sweaty. Their voice did that too cheerful pitch people use when they know they're walking into a buzzsaw. Given your unique institutional knowledge and the current transitional environment, they said, the company would like to offer a performance-based retention package, quarterly bonuses, increased stock options, and your choice of role realignment. I didn't let them finish. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I already filed my exit paperwork. Should be in your inbox any second. They blinked. Mouth open to stall or spin, maybe beg. I cut them off again. Don't worry. I left notes. Someone will figure out where the files are. And that was it. No speech. No scene. Just a quiet click. I signed out at 4:21 p.m. on a Wednesday, the same terminal I'd logged into every day for 12 years. The screen blinked back to life like it didn't even miss me. I walked past the mindfulness room Ivy used to run like a pop-up spa, past the blown-up poster of David Carmichael shaking hands with a senator, past the conference room where I once watched Ivy read her own career death sentence from a printed email. Outside the air was cool, ordinary. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, then popped my trunk and set the box inside. The framed email slid a little, still visible. I looked at it and whispered, "Still actionable." Then I drove away. The summit room was split, half suits, half sweatshirts. The kind of space where excess in denial sat beside interns clutching free tote bags like they were holding the future. Government reps, industry panels, buzzwords like regulatory harmony and ethical disruption tossed around like candy nobody asked for. Everyone was on their third cup of burnt coffee. The lights made everyone look equally tired and vaguely guilty. I sat near the back, fourth row from the exit. No name badge, no title card, just a plain notepad I had no intention of using and a travel mug that still smelled faintly like the compliance office I used to haunt. The session was called Whistleblower Compliance Trends, Triggers, and Thresholds. Sounded boring. It wasn't. A federal analyst stepped up to the podium. Crisp gray suit, hair tight, voice steady. "Let's look at one case that illustrates the entire spectrum of escalation failure," she said, clicking to the first slide. Across the screen, Case 1047C. When ignored voices become litigation. My pulse jumped once, then leveled out. She began walking through the case with the kind of calm that cuts sharper than outrage. An internal report was filed using appropriate protocols. The case was marked non-actionable without documented review. The original filing was later submitted to federal regulators using the company's own reference number. That one decision, keeping the internal ID, drew a direct line from misconduct to governance failure. Slide after slide clicked by. Timestamps, email headers, audit trails. Then, Ivy's infamous note filled the screen, blown up larger than life. Drama, not actionable. A few people let out quiet laughs. Others winced. The analyst didn't react. "When this image was presented during formal discovery," she said, calm as ever, "it changed the tone of the review. What began as a procedural concern became, in legal terms, willful neglect." She moved to the final slide. White background, black text, nothing else. Ignoring the right person at the wrong time isn't just arrogance. It's admissible. The room froze. You could hear someone near the front let out a sharp breath. Another whispered, "Jesus." I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't flinch, but something inside me settled. Not pride, not satisfaction, just closure. I thought of Ivy wherever she'd landed, of David Carmichael, probably off somewhere branding his fall from grace as executive minimalism. I thought about all the people who clapped along while the rot spread beneath their feet. And I thought of that old folder labeled Fallout, and the choice that started it all. I didn't shout. I documented. The lights came up. The crowd started drifting toward the coffee station. The analyst packed up, already focused on her next session. I sat for one more moment, watched the words on the screen fade into a blank desktop blue. Then I stood, slid my travel mug into my bag and walked out. Unnoticed. Exactly the way I liked it.